The sources who we spoke with were all on background, so they're not named. But one of them specifically acknowledged, yeah, we found out after the president announced it.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Today on the show, Project Freedom is on ice, how backlash from allies in the Gulf forced President Trump to make a U-turn in the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, health officials are worried that the Hantavirus outbreak could have left the ship undetected. We're going to talk about how they're tracking the deadly disease and what you need to know. Up first, though, amid inconsistent messaging on whether the U.S. is still at war with Iran, on Sunday, the president announced Operation Project Freedom. The goal was to break Iran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz. The very next day, Iran and the U.S. exchanged fire in the strait while U.S. military vessels accompanied two commercial ships. But then suddenly, on Tuesday, President Trump reversed course, saying he was pausing Project Freedom, claiming that negotiations with Iran to end the war were progressing. And of course, people were asking, why the about face? Well, we have exclusive reporting that pressure from some of the U.S.'s allies in the region may have played a role in the unexpected change of plans. So for more on this, I'm going to bring in Courtney Kube. She is a senior national security correspondent for NBC News. Hi, Court.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. So there's been a lot to keep track of with this story, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Then the president said he was pausing Project Freedom. And when he did, he wrote on Truth Social that it was, quote, based on the request of Pakistan and other countries. Your reporting revealed, though, that one of those, quote unquote, other countries was, in fact, Saudi Arabia. What happened?
It doesn't seem as if it was just the Saudi government that was talking to the Trump administration, expressing some displeasure about this Project Freedom. The backstory is when the president announced it on Sunday afternoon on his social media platform, he had not notified some of the other close allies in the region. So countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Jordan, they had not told them in advance that the president was going to announce it and really told them exactly what this new project was going to look like. Well, that, of course, led to some frustration on the part of some of these governments. The Saudi government reached out and said, look, we're not going to allow you to use our base, Prince Sultan Air Base, which is just southeast of Riyadh, and we're not going to allow you to fly military aircraft in our airspace in support of Project Freedom. You need to tell us more about this. So fast forward to Monday afternoon, President Trump calls the Saudi crown prince to try to smooth this over. Phone call didn't work. The Saudis would not change their stance on it, would not reopen the airspace to U.S. military. And then only hours later the next day, President Trump surprised people in his own cabinet, people in the United States military, by suddenly pausing the project or operation.
But the White House, in responding to your reporting, actually said that they had informed regional allies. They said, quote, regional allies were notified in advance.
Yeah, but we're confident that they did not. We know that there was some, there has been a lot of back and forth communication, and we know that there was some communication with them about possible options the U.S. could do moving forward that included a passageway. The military has spent days, if not weeks, during the ceasefire clearing out that passageway anyway, using drones and some robots and things. So that wasn't a secret that was something that was under discussion or consideration. What was the surprise to them was that when the president announced it and exactly how it was going to be implemented, they were not given a heads up on that. And one of the statements that we have, I mean, the officials who we spoke with and the sources who we spoke with were all on background, so they're not named. But one of them specifically acknowledged, yeah, we found out after the president announced it.
Walk us through how integral it is, how important it is for the United States to have access to Saudi's airspace along with the air base in Saudi Arabia in order to carry out something like Project Freedom, an operation like Project Freedom.
And it's not just that. I mean, it's been hugely critical to the war in Iran, to the blockade, everything. So there's a big U.S. military presence in Saudi Arabia, but Prince Sultan Air Base is where a huge component of it is. And that has been really critical during the war in Iran. So it seems very simple, right? You can fly the fighter aircraft, you can fly the surveillance aircraft off of the aircraft carrier out of other areas, but you need to be able to refuel them in the air. You need some of the supports. And also, just given the location of Saudi Arabia to the Persian Gulf, they want to have as many opportunities or options for military aircraft to land should there be an emergency, should something happen. It's a really important way station for the U.S. military. But again, we know that the Saudis restricted this, but other countries in the region who also have a big military presence were also frustrated by this and also may have been discussing the same option.
What was the ultimate objection to Project Freedom? Was it that they were not informed, they were not looped in, or was it also that they felt as if possibly it could make the stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz even worse, considering what it's done already to oil markets around the world?
They were frustrated that they weren't looped in, especially because it would involve aircraft and airspace, their own aircraft and their territorial airspace being used. But it does seem like there was something more to that we're still trying to figure out exactly what it was. I mean, keep in mind sort of the succession of what happened here. There was the president's announcement on Sunday. Then the U.S. military started this effort on Monday morning. It elicited a response from Iran that included attacks against these U.S. flagships and even against at least one of the U.S. military ships they attempted to hit during the course of this. So regional allies who have been watching their infrastructure damaged and targeted, in some cases their people, their civilians being injured and killed by these attacks by Iran, they probably wanted a security guarantee as part of this. And when the president announces an initiative and the U.S. begins it before it's been coordinated with these allies, then it makes a little bit more sense that they may have had some hesitation about this.
So, the president, as I mentioned earlier, right, he was not in the business of saying, well, we're pausing Project Freedom or stopping Project Freedom because I'm not getting coordination from our regional allies. Instead, he said we're getting close to a deal with Iran. Iran is now, it seems, reviewing a proposal from the United States. There's been a lot of back and forth. The president says we're not going back to the region until we actually have something concrete in place that we can end this war. What do we know about what is in this proposal and how close or how far the two sides may be?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some reporting on it. Like, I personally don't have any, but there's been some good reporting about what this proposal includes. I think at the end of the day, even if they can agree on just about every single piece of, easing the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz and potentially even reparations, I would find it difficult to believe that the U.S. the Trump administration would agree to that. But it does feel like the issue of the nuclear program, they remain very far apart. We hear from the Trump administration that they still want all of Iran's highly enriched uranium and potentially some more of its stockpile, maybe as low as 20% enriched, turned over to the United States. I don't see Iran doing that. Maybe turning it over to another nation or something, and then guaranteeing there'd be no enrichment. These are just things that have been a red line for Iran. So I don't know. We're not in the room during the negotiations, so we don't know what we don't know. But it does seem like they're still pretty far apart on that.
If a deal is reached, how quickly does the Strait of Hormuz normalize? At what point does the United States have any plans to pull out U.S. military assets from the region if they're able to come to a consensus?
I mean, I think we're talking weeks, if not months, before the situation in the Strait of Hormuz the backlog is cleared and things are operating the way that they were. I'll call that normal before February 27th or 8th. There's no indication the U.S. is going to pull back their military presence from there. The one caveat to that, President Trump has shown that he gets very focused on one region, on one issue, and then 2 months later, we're talking about a completely different one. And I would just point to Venezuela was early January. Several weeks later, they were starting to move the aircraft carrier and additional troops into the Middle East for Iran. But for now, I'm not getting any indication. And in fact, it's not getting a ton of attention, but during the ceasefire, the U.S. military has actually amplified their presence in the region. They have probably not double, but a significant amount more firepower and capability in the region than they did when the ceasefire began. And because of that, if in fact the president were to decide to restart major combat operations in Iran, I would expect that we would see the initial days of it to be the airstrikes, potential strikes from longer range systems like ships at a higher level than even at the very end of the war, which was a very, very high level of strikes.
Courtney Kube, as always, Thank you.
Thanks.
So officials are racing to contain a deadly outbreak of Hantavirus linked to a luxury cruise ship off the coast of Africa. 3 passengers have already died, and at least 5 more have been infected. The other 140 passengers on the ship are being held in isolation as officials monitor them for symptoms. Now, part of the concern here is that this is an extremely rare strain of the virus called the Andes strain. It is the only known type of the disease that spreads from person to person, and the incubation period for the virus can be as long as 6 weeks, which is a problem because dozens of passengers have already disembarked the ship and traveled across the world. So now health experts in the United States and around the world are launching urgent contact tracing operations to track how far this virus has actually spread. For that, I want to bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez, who's been tracking this for us. Hi, Raf.
Hey, Yasmin.
All right, let's talk about this ship because it was marooned off the coast of Africa. It's now en route to the Canary Islands. How did we get here?
So it is a long story and it is a long voyage. They set off back on April 1st down in South America from Argentina. They've been making their way north up through the Atlantic. And then on April 11th, a passenger died on the ship. There's actually a video of the captain coming out and announcing it to the rest of the passengers.
This is my sad duty to inform you that one of our passengers sadly passed away last night.
And he says, look, this is sad, this is tragic, but this is not something anyone needs to worry about. It all appears to be natural circumstances. So they continue sailing for another 12 days or so. And it's only at that point that it starts to become clear that other people are getting sick. The partner of the person who died is also starting to become unwell. And so on April 24th, 30 people get off of the ship on an island called St. Helena, and the one person, a older Dutch woman, flies from St. Helena to South Africa. She seems okay, but then she gets on a plane from South Africa to go back to the Netherlands, and she starts to show pretty serious symptoms. So at this point, people don't know what it is. They don't know what she's sick with, but they know she's really sick. So she is taken off the plane. She then dies in South Africa.
Wow.
Another passenger dies later on. And so at this point, you have 3 people dead, all directly connected to this cruise ship, and you had alarm bells going off everywhere.
What about the status of the people that are on board right now?
So there's about 140 people still on board right now. They are currently sailing from Cape Verde to the Canary Islands, which are a bunch of Spanish islands off the coast of Morocco. And we got an update from the World Health Organization that at this point, nobody on the ship is showing any symptoms. So that is good news. As you mentioned, though, the incubation period here can be 6 weeks. So no one can say with confidence at this stage that these people don't have the virus and are not yet showing symptoms. And we did hear from the World Health Organization, apparently morale is getting better as passengers know that they're heading to the Canary Islands, and hopefully, they're going to get off that ship and be able to head home safely after that.
What is the plan once they actually dock?
Yeah, so that is the big question. The plan right now is that they get to the Canary Islands, and then there is a careful process of screening. People are going to be tested. If they need to, they are going to be quarantined. And once authorities are confident enough that these people are healthy enough, they will be put on planes and they will be sent home. And so right now, the plan is that they will arrive in the Canary Islands Sunday, and we'll see the first evacuations Monday.
You mentioned these kind of nearly 24 or so passengers from at least 12 different countries that left the cruise ship on April 24th. How are officials tracking all of these individuals and whether or not they potentially have the hantavirus or not?
It's like almost kind of triggering to say the words, but contact tracing is back. And basically, governments all around the world are scrambling right now to figure out where are the passengers who got off the ship and flew to various countries, and who were they in contact with? Are there any causes for concern? At the moment in the U.S., we have heard from state authorities in Texas, Virginia, Georgia, Arizona, and California, who are all saying that they are aware of residents of their states who were on the ship who have now come back home. They say all of those people are being monitored. At this point, none of them are showing any signs of symptoms, but you multiply that by many, many, many countries all around the world, and you have just a very large universe of people who are of potential concern right now.
I know that there's a flight attendant that's now being monitored as well. Was this flight attendant on the plane that was supposed to carry this woman from South Africa to the Netherlands that has now subsequently died?
Yeah, exactly. So according to Dutch media, this flight attendant was working on that April 25 flight that this Dutch woman got on and was then taken off of when she was showing serious symptoms. The flight attendant is now back in Amsterdam. At this point, she is showing symptoms of something. We don't know exactly what. She's been tested for the hantavirus, and at this stage, we don't know whether or not she has the virus. And a lot is riding on this, because if she were to test positive, that raises a lot of questions about other passengers on the plane. If it turns out the flight attendant is negative and this is something else, then that's really good news for everybody.
Do we know with this particular strain of the hantavirus the origin of this virus at this point, and why it is now that this particular strain is able to be transmitted from person to person, and how exactly it's transmitted?
So we don't know for sure, but we have a pretty good working hypothesis, which is that this Dutch couple that was on board the ship took a day excursion in the southernmost city in Argentina, which is known for its bird watching. So they went out, they did some bird watching, and apparently as part of this trip, they passed a pretty major landfill. It's kind of hard to imagine how there would be great bird watching around the landfill. But authorities are saying that there are rats at that landfill site that have been known to carry the Andes strain of the hantavirus. Often, the way it's transmitted from rodents to humans is if humans come into contact with the feces of these rodents. And so the working hypothesis right now is that at some point when this Dutch couple was at this landfill site, they just stood too close to some of these rat droppings, and they think that is how they picked up the virus. And then from there, it seems to have spread from some of the people to other passengers on the ship.
And Raf, what are the symptoms of hantavirus?
It presents like a lot of fevers, kind of headaches, lethargy. So part of the reason that people didn't immediately jump to the conclusion it was hantavirus is it looks like a lot of other kind of respiratory diseases. You know, it sort of presents like a major flu.
And the mortality rate is quite high.
Yeah, that's right. So for the Andes strain, it can be around 40%,
Wow.
Which is really serious. You know, if you think about it, COVID was kind of 1%. The trade-off is that COVID was so easy to transmit from one person to another, whereas hantavirus, we're being told, is pretty difficult.
So you're talking about contact tracing, virus spread, mask wearing. Again, it's all very reminiscent of what we experienced during COVID. Many of the early surges of COVID-19 began on cruise ships back in 2020. How are health experts, how is the World Health Organization characterizing this moving forward with so many people worried about a potential next epidemic and or pandemic?
So the World Health Organization totally understands that that is the question on the minds of many people around the world right now. And they really took it head on at this press conference earlier, which was led by the Director General of the WHO. They are saying this is not the next COVID. They are pointing out that there was a hantavirus outbreak back in 2018 in South America, and you and I didn't hear about it because it was contained, the chain of transmission was broken, they got it under control. Obviously, what is concerning about this situation is you had a lot of people from a lot of different countries concentrated on one ship, rubbing shoulders, not knowing that the hantavirus was potentially spreading amongst them. And then they scattered to the winds, the four corners of the earth, literally. So you now have public health officials all across the planet really trying to catch up with where those people went, who they were in contact with, and the race is on right now. But the World Health Organization is saying that they assess that the risk to public health on any kind of large scale is low. They say we've dealt with this in the past, and they are confident that if public health guidelines are followed, that this will be a limited outbreak.
Ralph Sanchez, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you watched, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.